So recently I joined an ayahuasca ceremony, and one of the questions I had when going in was about Sekhmet. And she
Yes.
is an Egyptian goddess. She was also called Vereteka, or Great of Magic.
Yes.
And in the experience, it was very beautiful. I spent a lot of hours in being God, and I felt that everything is in God. And
Yes.
since there are no boundaries between the one and the other, there's really no experience of space or time. Um,
Well, there's
and
no
then and then there,
experience at all of the one. The experience happens when it is all that is, the portion of the one that actually does know itself as all that is. But in the one itself, there's no experience of anything.
yes, and then so you've explained that when God expresses himself, like when the one becomes multiple, it's immediately from one to three. Um, because when God becomes manifest, there's also the transition period or the boundary line between the two.
Yes.
So my impression was that Sekhmet is actually in this space, that she is able to balance these multiple dimensions, reaching into both of them at the same time. And that brings me to my first question: how would you describe Sekhmet? What does she represent, and in what dimension does she exist?
Sekhmet is an archetypal energy, a level of consciousness within all that is representative of certain concepts on your planet, certain concepts within the collective consciousness of your planet, but expressed through a particular culture called Egyptian awareness. Sekhmet is the idea to some degree of what you typically refer to as magic, or what Sekhmet would particularly perceive as shapeshifting from one reality to another, as many of the Egyptian archetypal symbolic gods were representative of. And thus, Sekhmet allows for a fluidity of change, a magical kind of representation that can also extend into different disciplines depending upon how the energy of Sekhmet, if one is used to that idea, if one is familiar with that idea, if one wishes to harmonize with that idea, can apply in their lives in different disciplines. Is this answering your question, or is there something more specific you wanted to discuss about this?
Well, I do have more questions, but that's a very nice start. It's a very good explanation. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so I've heard you talk about cats, and sometimes you use the phrase the animals that you refer to as cats on your planet. And it made me wonder whether cats or felines or lions exist in other on other planets as well.
Well, certainly in parallel realities that are versions of Earth, they do. But of course, on other planets, there may be certain animals that are similar, but not necessarily identical, because they will adapt to whatever form is representative of what's required for the consciousness of that world. So there may be some similarities in different worlds that you may say, well, that's very cat like, but they won't necessarily exactly be cats.
Is there a connection between cats and Sirius?
Peripherally, but not directly.
You've also explained about shamans and that they are practiced at changing their frequency to match the frequency of other realities and dimensions.
Some of them
And
are, yes.
so how I've understood that we change our frequencies actually by changing our belief system. So by getting rid of fear-based or irrelevant beliefs, we change
Yes.
our frequency. So how
Yes.
would it work if we want to match our frequency to a specific dimension or location? How do we go about?
Well, this is what your imagination is for. If you can build some kind of a image or feeling about what the idea of another reality represents and see a version of yourself in that, or something that is representative of what you desire to change into, then all you really have to do is start mirroring what that version of you is doing enough, strongly enough, consistently enough, that you start taking on the qualities of that version of you. And then either quickly or slowly over time, you can start actually exhibiting the qualities of that being and therefore shift yourself to that reality.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Um, and then so another thing you've told us about is the Sphinx, that it actually used to have the form of Anubis.
A long time ago, yes.
a long time ago, and that below the Sphinx there's a chamber, and that some of the secrets that have been lost in Atlantis are stored there.
Yes.
So if we would want to access that space or the information that is there, um, what would that require? How would we
Well,
do
first of all, there are many people in that area who know exactly where that chamber is. They're just not really talking about it. People have asked permission to drill down, to drill a hole under the right paw of the Sphinx, to send a camera through that hole to see what's there, but they have not been allowed to do so at this particular point. So we will leave it up to all of you to figure out how to create a relationship with the people in that area that would be willing to allow that chamber to be explored.
Would there be a possibility of accessing that space by changing our frequency?
Well, of course, you have to change your frequency to experience a difference in reality.
But then, does it require us going there physically?
You don't have to go there physically to be able to know what's there. You can tap into it in a variety of ways. But the idea is that it is important for the revelation of that and exposure of that chamber at a certain timing as well.
Thank you so much, Bashar.
You are welcome. Good day.
Hi, Bashar. I'm Erin from Shepherdstown, West Virginia. I have a question about Willahilla christening the hybrid 700 years in our future. I've encountered a few people who feel some fear about her talking about us being cookies and being eaten eventually when we're fully baked. I was wondering if you could provide some clarity on that statement and maybe help people let go of some fears about that.
As we have discussed, there is an evolution progressing on your planet so that it becomes the sixth hybrid race. In that sense, you are being baked as a species. You are turning into something delicious, not in the literal sense of being eaten, but in the sense of being enjoyed as a beautiful confection, as something you're all familiar with that feels warm and inviting, transforming into something that is considered a lovely dessert. Again, not to be taken literally. So the idea is a euphemism and a euphemistic way of expressing that you're all baking into something beautiful and wonderful.
Hello, Bashar.
Good day, good day.
How are you?
Perfect, and you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
All right.
All right. So my question is, when it comes to things such as parallel timelines,
Yes.
parallel Earths and such, and so there's this version of me experiencing this reality, and there's other versions of me experiencing other realities.
Yes, although they're not literally you.
Oh, could you explain that further?
Well, every version is its own person. They may look like you, and that's why you're saying versions of me, but they're not literally you. They're not this version. They are another person.
Okay, so when are the alternate timelines is there always a split, or is there like when I make a decision there's a split and a split?
The splits don't happen when you make the decisions. The splits are already there. It's just that you shift when you make a decision into that split. And you're doing this constantly, billions of times a second. Remember, what you're calling a single timeline is actually made up of billions of different timelines.
Right, I see. So why do I end up as me experiencing this version of me and the other ones that made the other decisions?
Because the higher version, let's just generally call it the oversoul, that contains all the extensions of all the different versions of you, experiences all those different versions. You happen to be this version that the oversoul decided it would choose to experience, along with all the other versions. You happen to be this version.
I see. And is there any way to say, telepathically communicate with other versions of myself.
Yes. And again, you're doing that all the time. You may not recognize it, but you're doing it all the time. A lot of times, some of the experiences and knowledge of other versions in other realities is leaking through and might be giving you different kinds of imagination thoughts and things like that that you think, so to speak, are your own.
I see.
There's constant cross communication going on.
Right. Oh, constant. And how does this transmission is about karma. How does karma factor into that?
Again, only as we've described it. Each and every version gets to decide for itself in its own representation when it is in alignment with whether its true core frequency is, when it is out of alignment, and what actions can be taken to bring itself back into alignment according to the process that this version represents in discovering who and what you really truly are.
Okay, right. That all makes sense. Now, if I may talk about UFOs just for a minute, and the versions that we have here on Earth that were reverse engineered. I'm
Yes.
just wondering if, where are they up to, right? And how long before they become public, if they become public at all?
Some of it may become public within the next couple of decades, maybe 3 decades at the most. But again, bits and pieces of that information do already exist, of course. This is why you're asking the question. But they're not as far along as you might think. They have reverse engineered certain things that do exhibit what you typically refer to as anti-gravity. But they're still experimenting with a lot of it. And not to put too fine a point on it, but a lot of the ships that they've reverse engineered, well, let's just say, without being judgmental, that they're of a more simple design.
Right, I see. And in a previous transmission, a person did ask if the ones being reverse engineered are interdimensional. And I believe you said the people reverse engineering it came into unexpected consequences. I was
Correct.
wondering if you could go into that more deeply. For example,
No,
what
not really.
unexpected?
Not really. Some of the unexpected consequences are that people got shifted into other dimensions and never came back. Other consequences are they may have shifted through other dimensions to other locations on your planet. Some of them may have been molecularly affected by this. Molecules could have been displaced, gone out of alignment. There can be electromagnetic effects that can be detrimental if it's not done correctly. These are some of the things they have experienced, but we won't go more deeply into it than that.
Okay, that's sort of what I expected the answer to be. Also, next year is 2023.
Yes.
Which I'm looking very forward to, because as you've said many times, that will be the beginning of the window of open contact.
Yes.
So what I'm thinking is, or what I'm wondering is, when they first make contact, there'll be, I guess, news articles.
Not right away. Not right away. Again, as we have said, just because it's the beginning of the window doesn't mean everything happens all at once. We're just talking about a shift in energy, a shift in vibration in a certain way that allows for the probability of more contact, which will begin in more isolated places on an individual basis, and even just with the idea perhaps of more sightings, more visibly to more people.
Right. So it will slowly start to become commonplace that UFO sightings just an ordinary thing.
Yes, eventually be just like, oh, look, there goes another one.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic news to me, because over the years, for example, in the 1980s, it was often considered crackpots and so on that saw UFOs. So I'm glad that it's becoming more and more common.
All right, well, that's based on the decisions of those who are shifting to realities where it's already more common.
Oh, that's excellent. I would like to talk about, what we call artificial intelligence, even though it's probably more accurately digital intelligence.
The devices may, in a sense, be artificial, but the intelligence is real.
Right, I see. could you give us a timeline of when the next big leap in artificial intelligence is or will be, and when it will very definitely pass the Turing test?
10 to 15 years maximum.
10 to 15 years maximum.
Yes. Somewhere in there.
What would somewhere in there? What
Yes.
would be like the nearest? So 10 years that the nearest.
It's not impossible that this could be experienced in 5 years. It's just that we see the probability being higher between 10 and 15.
Right, I understand.
As we read your energy now.
Oh, as we read the energy now. So that could increase depending on decisions in society.
Absolutely. These things are always in flux. And as we have said, there's no such thing as a prediction of the future. There is only a sensing of the energy and the most likely probability of manifestation at the moment the reading is taken.
Right, I understand. Okay. Okay, that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much.
You are very welcome. Good day.
Good day.
Okay. Are people incarnated on Earth voluntarily or by karma?
Voluntarily.
Okay. And Buddhists say that chanting sutras and mantras can eliminate negative karma in the past and present lives. Is this true, and why?
All right. First of all, before we answer that question, we can perceive that many questions having to do with this subject of karma may have been formulated by people before they were able to hear the monologue that we have delivered. Therefore, many of these questions about karma may still be coming from an old-fashioned definition of what karma is. So we will proceed with any such questions in a manner that will relate them to what we have said in the monologue about the actual definition of karma, and show how all of these questions coming from different viewpoints with respect to the idea of the old-fashioned definition can be turned around into a new understanding, a more modern understanding, a more streamlined understanding, thus rendering many of these questions, in some sense, obsolete. Nevertheless, it will be a good exercise to, as you say, drive home the actual definition with respect to many of these questions that may be coming forward from an out-of-date perspective. The idea, again, of karma is that it does not accumulate. It does not come from other lives. Now, yes, there is such a thing as consequence of choice. Yes, what you put out is what you get back. But as we have said, karma, in its original intended form, simply means action. And therefore, as everything exists simultaneously, it is possible for someone to decide to connect to another simultaneous existence that you would call a past life, even though it exists at the same time as the present one. And they may decide to choose to make a connection to certain experiences in those other people's lives and make them relevant for the theme that a person may be exploring in this life. And in that context, you can say, well, the idea of what choices were made and what was accumulated in terms of consequence to those choices may come from another life, but it isn't the idea of something that happens automatically. It is something that is chosen for the theme of this particular life, connecting energetically to the themes of another simultaneous life. It isn't an automatic thing that accumulates and goes from one lifetime to another, since that other person in that other life isn't you. Now, we can talk about the idea that from the oversoul level, the oversoul can say, well, that is my life, and that is my life, and that is my life. And from that level, there is a kind of a continuity. But we will talk about the oversoul in another transmission. The idea, in terms of answering the question right now at hand, is that no, it doesn't automatically come from another life. And therefore, it is something that, again, to remind you all, is simply a choice that is made to recognize that someone may be out of balance in this life. And karma is the ability to take the actions necessary to bring one back into balance, no matter what themes you may be connecting to from other simultaneous lives going on. It's not something that actually follows you in that sense or accumulates upon you from one life to the next, because you only exist in the now.
Okay, thank you. Did Yeshua ever speak to the idea of karma?
Yes, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Again, the choice being made to stay in an aligned, balanced state, in alignment with all that is. And should you find yourself getting out of alignment with that, again, remembering that to be of service and to treat others as you would be treated is the actions to be taking with regard to balancing oneself, bringing oneself back into alignment, and thus utilizing the originally intended meaning of karma.
Okay, and if you help kill chickens and ducks by helping your family catch them and kill them, will you also have karma? This person is saying that they had to do that when they were a child and it was a very bad experience for them, and now they're afraid they have negative karma from the death of those animals.
Again, if it is something you can choose now to understand was representative of being out of alignment, even if you were made to do it by your family at that time, it is more the idea of the consequential energy of their choices that they will experience rather than you experiencing it because it was done against your will. So the idea is to simply recognize that it is something you no longer prefer to do and take the actions necessary in your life so that they do not happen that way again. And that will be balancing the idea of the energy and using karma in its more modern format of taking the actions to bring yourself into balance. Do not worry. Do not judge yourself in that sense. You will find that by simply moving forward in your life at this time in the way that you would prefer to, everything will be brought back into balance.
And if a person sacrifices 100,000 people to save 1 billion people, will this person have positive or negative karma?
Again, the idea is to ask oneself why it was necessary to sacrifice those people in the first place. Were you out of balance in bringing yourself into a situation like that, in attracting such a circumstance? And if you were out of balance in doing that, then take the actions necessary to cease doing things like that that bring you into those kinds of circumstances and situations, so you will not have to make decisions like that in the future. Thus, then again, taking the actions that bring you back into balance and utilizing the concept of karma in its more modern terminology and its more modern definition.
So in that sense, there's not any real answer. Like, I mean, if we saw something happening that would involve stopping the person that's doing the negative act.
Again, you must remember that there are no accidents, and therefore attracting something into your life that would cause you to have a different choice, that would give you the opportunity to make different choices. In other words, give them the opportunity to stop doing negative things and choose more positive ones. Then you have to take into account also the idea that that person is in your life not by accident, and therefore is part of your ability to attract what you need to use karma to rebalance yourself.
Since time doesn't exist, how does karma work?
Well, as we have said, first of all, everything happens in the now. And the idea of utilizing the correct definition of karma is that you take actions in the now that are representative of rebalancing yourself if you feel you are out of balance. And it isn't that the idea of time or the experience of time doesn't exist. It may not really exist mechanically, fundamentally, but it does exist as a side effect, and it is something that you can and do experience. Therefore, still recognizing that everything does exist in the now, Using karma in its originally intended definition means you take whatever actions in the present are necessary to bring yourself back into alignment if you feel that you have been out of alignment.
And having to do with karma and free will, can my soul agree to solve karma from another life of my soul in my life now without my consent?
You are your soul. You have to give yourself the consent to balance yourself by taking the actions necessary to do so in this life, in this experience.
So the idea that a negative, I think in the past you may have said that you have to, the soul oversoul balances these things out in terms of between lives, even like one
Yes.
parallel life will balance out what another one is doing. So does the person that's the personality experiencing one of those lives have a choice about it, or is that a decision that was made at another level of itself and it cannot really negate that?
It depends on how connected it is to the theme you are exploring. Because as we have said, the person you are is a theme, is a path. And if it is something you decided to create for yourself, then it cannot be avoided because you established the path as the theme you would explore. However, in general terms, no. Someone doesn't necessarily have to choose to balance the self in any particular life. You can do it in any particular state of being that you happen to be in on the course of your evolution. So it's not absolutely mandatory unless you have made it mandatory for the theme that you chose to be in this life.
So it sounds like the better idea is not to look at things that are happening to you from the perspective of, oh, this is happening because I did this in a past life, or I agreed to do it and balance it out here or something. More the idea of just staying in the present and recognizing the connections you're making to other parallel lives are your choice.
Yes.
Based on what you're attracting and the theme you're playing out.
Yes, and remember again, because the original definition of karma is action, which happens in the moment, then in a sense, karma is synonymous with free will. You are making the free will choice to take the actions necessary to maintain balance in your life. That's what karma is. It's not something that accumulates from other times, other places. It is not retribution. It is not something that builds up and then gets you back. It is simply in the moment, the clear, free choice, free will recognition that you may be out of balance with who you prefer to be, and using the concept of action and karma and free will to bring yourself into balance by making choices that are more representative of who you prefer to be. That's all there is to it. It is very important and very crucial, which is why we're having this discussion today, for your society to really start to let go of these outdated and old-fashioned definitions of karma. They only anchor you into patterns and habits that aren't actually real. You are creating from a linear perspective a circumstance that doesn't actually exist in truth. The idea, again, is to bring everything back into present, to take responsibility, the ability to respond for the choices you have made and the consequences therefrom, and then decide, again, with your free will, your freedom to choose what actions to take, what karma to use to bring yourself into the balance you say you prefer to exhibit in your life. This requires you to truly let go of these old-fashioned definitions and really pay attention to the new definition we are offering you as a suggestion so that you can be free to make the choices that are true for you and live in the present and take responsibility. And again, this doesn't mean it erases the idea that there are consequences for your choices. Of course, there are. Again, what you put out is what you get back. But this doesn't have anything to do with what karma actually is. Karma, again, is simply the ability to take the actions necessary to bring yourself into balance if you believe you are out of balance. That's it. Free yourselves from the outdated definitions that anchor you to the concept of repeating patterns and the idea that you have to accumulate things and somehow discharge them in that way. The minute you choose to balance yourself, then you have used karma appropriately, and nothing else accumulates until you're out of balance. And again, you can balance yourself in that moment, in the present. That's karma. And that's it.
And so the idea that if a person has been telling themselves a story about, oh, I did this in a past life or whatever, and a circumstance comes up that again triggers the idea of the story you were telling yourself before about why you have this certain emotional or physical reaction to something.
Yes, the closest analogy, as we said, is that someone may choose to connect to someone else's life that is experiencing certain things that they believe might be appropriate or germane for them to explore in the theme they chose for this life. But it's not something that you did that is coming from that life, in the sense that you are building up an accumulation of something that has to be discharged as a judgment against you. It's not coming from outside. The idea is that you may connect to that life having a certain experience because you believe that it will help you explore the theme that gives you the opportunity to continue to take the actions that bring yourself into balance relative to that theme you're connecting to. But you didn't do it because that's not your life. You're just using that life for your own purposes to help you balance in this one.
So time and time again, it brings you back to stay in the present, recognize all the connections that you're making,
Yes.
being made from the present.
Yes.
And that the minute you reinterpret what you were previously believing was something coming from a past life into a choice of whether or not you want to continue to connect with that particular experience, sort of like a library book where you can look at the book, but do you really want to check it out of the library?
Yes.
And experience the consequence of that?
Yes. You can use it in the way it was intended for the connection that was made to learn a lesson, to help you explore a theme. But again, it's not karma in the sense that most people on your planet have been thinking of it for thousands of years. You're not anchored, except again in the anchorings you chose to have to explore a certain theme, but you created those. So if you created those connections for your own purpose of exploration, when you've learned the lesson, you have exhausted the theme and you have exhausted the reason to keep that connection going.
So this next person's question of, is karma stored in our DNA? Would it be closer to is our theme encoded in our DNA, and the effect of that maybe the stories that we tell ourselves?
Yes. And again, instead of saying, is karma encoded in the DNA, it would be clearer and more appropriate and accurate to say, is the theme I'm exploring encoded in the DNA? And can I use karma as a tool to take the actions to help me explore that theme? Yes. So what we're saying and what we're suggesting is start changing the definition of karma from something that is investing you in a certain idea or pattern, and start looking at it as a tool to help you explore the theme and keep you on track with that exploration. It's the theme that is represented in the DNA, not karma.
That's fascinating. So then the idea of something being unchangeable. Okay, my theme is encoded in my DNA. I'm experiencing opportunities to balance certain energies out by the things that I manifest.
Yes.
And so is there any aspect of it that is truly unchangeable, or even your theme is changeable?
The theme